In 2016, a solo developer would go on to make Harvest Moon in his own image. Not a one-to-one translation, of course, but more of trying to capture the feeling of Harvest Moon. And it outsold the original. This made Harvest Moon do something it had never done before. Harvest Moon hardly needs an introduction. It used to be the de facto farming sim experience. If you wanted to play out the fantasy of leaving the city in favor of a boondock town, growing crops, tending to cattle, mingling with your neighbors, Harvest Moon was pretty much the only place you lived that fantasy out. The franchise did well. Really well. What started out as a Nintendo exclusive series would eventually spread to different consoles, spanning several generations. Each iteration bringing its own differences, sometimes a different town, sometimes different villagers, sometimes different crops. The one thing that would stay the same is that every year you could expect a new title on store shelves. Here in the West, the name had become synonymous with the genre itself, and this worked out incredibly well because behind the scenes, Harvest Moon was actually the result of a partnership. While Natsume Inc. published the games outside of the Japanese market, Marvelous was the team who actually made the game. A relationship that worked for many years until it didn't. Oh, and a little fun fact, Harvest Moon was not the original name of the game. You see, in the early days of the gaming industry, it was very common for games to be rebranded locally, with just entirely new names. A great example of this would be Earthbound being localized from Mother. The game's original title was Bokujo Monogatari, roughly Farm Story. Clearly, that doesn't quite roll off the tongue in the Western market, thus Harvest Moon was born. And it was a name that stuck. This was pretty important, because what this meant was Natsume Inc. now owned the rights to the name Harvest Moon outside of the Japanese market, while Marvelous owned the game. I guess a good way to think of it is Marvelous would make a toy, and then Natsume would make the packaging they shipped the toy off in. In 2014, the partnership would come to an end. Marvelous came to the decision that they now wanted to publish their games in the Western market under their own publishing company, Xseed Games. The problem with this, though, is that Marvelous didn't own the rights to the name. Natsume Inc. did. So Marvelous relaunched the series under a new name, Story of Seasons. The same games, just with a different name. Meanwhile, Natsume decided they wanted to keep producing games under the Harvest Moon name. Later that same year, with a new team of developers, they would go on to release Harvest Moon: The Lost Valley. And just like that, Harvest Moon's identity had been split in two. There was now two farming sim brands, two competing identities, and one very confused audience. Despite the fact that there were now two active farming sim brands, neither of them had branched out of the console market. Because of this, a massive black hole-sized vacuum was left in the PC space. During this time, if you were a PC gamer and you wanted a cozy farming experience, simply there just was nothing. It remained like that for a couple of years too, up until 2016, when a new contender would throw their hat in the ring. A new title in the genre, and one that was exclusive to PC. Stardew Valley. In 2016, something small slipped its way into the void. There was no publisher, no franchise, no history of credentials, just a single developer, Eric Barone, also known as ConcernedApe. February 26, 2016 to be exact, Stardew Valley launched very quietly. There wasn't any kind of massive marketing campaign, there was no kind of press tour, just a pixelated farming game that dropped on Steam. And anyone who had grown up playing Harvest Moon could tell right off the bat what this was. A memory. A love letter. Stardew wasn't trying to modernize the series. No 3D graphics, no gimmicks to make it feel fresh and new. What it did do was nail the feeling that Harvest Moon used to have. Busy mornings tending to your farm, rustic tools to get the job done, and a sleepy town full of people who would eventually learn your name. It honestly felt like the Harvest Moon that people remembered, and not what it was in the current year. I think that mattered a lot, actually. Mind you, this was an exclusively PC audience at the time. The same people who had watched Harvest Moon titles passed them by. Their only alternatives prior to that would have been emulation, and honestly, that just doesn't feel the same. Most importantly though, Stardew Valley dropped into a space where it had no competition. It was in its own environment where it had nothing but room to grow, room to shape its own identity, its own fan base, and it was a fucking hit. This shit sold like ice water in hell. Through word of mouth and Steam reviews, millions of players found what they had been missing. By the time the industry had noticed what was happening, Stardew wasn't just successful, it had become a new reference point. Instead of it being compared to Harvest Moon, Stardew was now the game that other games would be getting referenced to. This proved one thing. There was still a strong audience for this type of game, and that audience was playing it on their PC. By 2017, it was impossible to ignore. A cozy farming experience could exist on the PC, and not only exist, but thrive lavishly. With millions of copies sold, the reality had set in. The legacy brands had a choice to make. We now had a new term that had never really existed before: Harvest Moon-like, a phrase that was now being used to describe cozy farming games. Maybe that doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you own the rights to the name Harvest Moon, hearing your franchise turn into a genre descriptor probably grabs your attention. When a new frontier opens up, in this case the PC gaming market, you probably feel compelled to throw your hat into the ring, which is exactly what Natsume did. There's just one problem. The way they entered the PC space felt odd. On November 14th, 2017, Natsume would drop the first PC Harvest Moon title, Harvest Moon: Light of Hope. Light of Hope didn't look like the Harvest Moon games that had existed for decades now. Visually, it was completely different. Since the days of SNES, Harvest Moon had largely moved into a 3D presentation. Outside of some of the handheld titles, the series had long since left the 2D space. But now, right after Stardew Valley exploded in popularity, a 2D game, suddenly Natsume's Harvest Moon found itself to be 2D as well. Interesting, right? Funny how that works. Now, technically, the models themselves are still 3D. Things like characters, crops, those things are low poly 3D assets that have been flattened down onto a 2D perspective, with 3D portraits popping up during dialogue. It almost feels like the assets for a full 3D game were there, but somewhere along the way they decided to just crush the whole thing down. The result is this strange visual hybrid. HD textures on low poly models. Everything has this ugly slight blur. Honestly, the game is just fucking ugly. It looks like a rushed mobile app. Everything has this strange gradient shading, like something you'd see in a mid-2000s Flash game. The entire presentation feels cheap. Like the art team were still figuring things out while the game was already packaged and sold. It all just kind of reinforces the same idea that this thing feels rushed. And the $20 price tag is just, that's crazy. You couldn't pay me $20 to own this piece of shit. I'm not going to get into the story, the NPCs, or any of the deeper mechanics because this isn't a review. But if you ask me to summarize the overall feeling of this game in one word, that word would be soulless. So the obvious question here is, did Natsume try to rip off ConcernedApe? I mean, maybe not necessarily. We'll never truly know their internal reasoning. But were they trying to step into a market that Stardew Valley had just proven was incredibly lucrative on PC? Oh, without a doubt. The funny thing is, Harvest Moon never really disappeared. The name still exists, new titles are still being released, the brand is technically still alive. But the meaning of Harvest Moon, the feeling, moved on. Stardew Valley wasn't successful because it copied Harvest Moon. It was successful because it remembered Harvest Moon. Not the logo or the branding, not the gimmicks or the stories, but the feeling that players had when they first experienced those games. The slow mornings full of chores, the simple routines for your day-to-day life, a town that gradually becomes more familiar to you. The quiet fantasy of building a life somewhere small. And that's kind of the strange thing about long-running franchises, you know? Over time, the players stop being loyal to the brand itself, and they instead become loyal to the memory of what that brand once meant to them. So when Stardew Valley dropped on PC back in 2016, it didn't just fill a gap in the market, it filled a gap in people's hearts. It recreated the emotional core of Harvest Moon at a time when the official franchise no longer did, which meant something really bizarre happened. For the first time ever, the authentic Harvest Moon experience wasn't even a Harvest Moon game. Something like that is something you can't really come back from. You can own the trademark, you can own the shelf space, hell, you can even own the name. But that doesn't mean that you own the feeling. That's something that lives with the players. And in this case, the players made a decision. Harvest Moon didn't lose its audience to Stardew Valley. It lost them to a younger version of itself. Now my question for you, do you think Stardew Valley forced Harvest Moon's hand? Also, let me know what other thoughts you have about the video. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Leave it down below. Also, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. It's insane how much that helps with reach. Alright, stinkers. I'll catch you in the next one.